And we continue learning Dirshu Mishnah Berurah. We're in the middle of Hilchais Tefillah Siman Pei Tes. We're up to Sif Gimel. In the previous year we started to speak about what you're allowed to do before davening. We spoke about greeting one another, how one shouldn't say Shalom, the name of Hashem. You should not go out of your way to greet someone, but if you bump into him, you're allowed to say good morning. And we started already to see that if you already began saying brachas, that already removes some of the stigma, because you already spoke to Hashem, you already started your tefillah, then it's not as big a problem. And we pick up from Sif Gimel, in which the Mechaber teaches us, Asr loylis asik bisrachav, it is forbidden for one to deal with his own needs, or to go on the road, before he davens Shemona Esrei. Says the Ramah mixes brachas kodim shamar baruch shamar, and there's some mekilim in a similar vein like we saw yesterday. If you say mixes brachas even before you say baruch shamar, we turn over the page over here and the Ramah comments. Even though there are those who are mekilim, says the Ramah, v'toiv lahachmir bazeh. One should be machmir. Continues the Mechaber, v'loy lecha v'loy lishtois. You're not allowed to eat, you're not allowed to drink before davening. Avol mayim motor. Today is going to be a very famous halacha. You're allowed to drink water, lishtais kodim tefillah. Bein b'chol, bein b'shabbos v'yantiv. V'chein acholim u'mashkin l'rafua motor. So we just learned perhaps a startling halacha for many. It's a straight up, black and white, sifin shulchan aruch. You cannot eat or drink, aside from water, says the Mechaber, before you daven, Shabbos, Yantiv, etc. But if the refuah, it's different. So let's right away, before anyone jumps to any conclusions, let's go straight into the Mishnah Berurah. Over here, Sivkatin Yudzayin, says the Mishnah Berurah, Lis Asik, you're forbidden to deal with your own needs. V'koidim ara abayker shar la'asas malacha. So first of all, says the Mishnah Berurah, this only begins when the time for tefillah begins, quoting the Shalah, that if it's before the morning begins, then you're allowed to do what you need to do. You should do nothing before you say the brachas. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this Eliyah Rabbah is not referring to any time in the night, means a half hour before Baiker, a half hour before Alais, you have to stop doing anything until you say brachas. What are you not allowed to do? You're not allowed to be asik b'tzarachav, says the Mishnah Berurah, Sevkatin Yudchas, Mishesh le'avadim ivrim. So as Jewish servants, like Misharsim, says Sharech sheim sha'oshu, yazirei mi ba'erev, you should warn them at night, shebekuma mimitasa, when they get up from their bed, v'racha to yedeyim, and they wash their hands, v'yivarchu ha'brachas, v'yikru parsha achas, v'yishanu shel shema. They should say bracha, you say one parsha of Shema, and then v'achar kach yachal asay sirachav. So even if one has a job, he has to do something, he has to go and tend to his master. Says the Mishnah Berurah, great. So you wash your hands, you say brachas, you say the first parsha of Shema, and then you could do what needs to be done. And that's really a big klal, as we're going to see, is that if one needs to do something before davening, you get up, you wash your hands, you say brachas, you say the first parsha of Shema, and then you can. But says the Mishnah Berurah, as we continue quoting the Shos Yaakov and the Magin Gibayrim v'cholzeh midas hachasidos, aval medina ein kpeida medina. This is not a din medina. But now we continue. So too in the afternoon. Dinam k'moisha achris. Achi yisbal sevkatan chaf. V'afilu b'makom she'ava yachal gamgen yisbal matzibur b'zmanai. Says Mishnah Berurah, what do you mean? I'm traveling, and then when I get there, I'm going to daven aval pi kain. It is aser. You cannot travel before you daven. As we turn over the page, continues the Mishnah Berurah and explains to us why going in the road is like dealing with your own needs. They're not going to wait for you. Then you're able to go on the road, as we'll see in Sivchas, all the things that you're allowed to do before davening. I just want to scroll up for a moment. Dirshu, note number 26, points out that if you're doing a mitzvah, we're going to see very soon that you're allowed to do Chavsei Shamayim before davening. And now the Dirshu over here points out, what if you're going to daven somewhere? You're not going on a trip. I'm going to daven, for example, the quintessential place to go to daven. I'm going to the Kaisel Maravi. Says Rav Chaim Kanievsky and Ar L'Tzion, that is not a problem. You're allowed to do that. Now, one more Dirshu note number 27 points out, let's say someone is worried that if he davens first, it's going to be traffic, etc. Says the Shevet HaLevi, Rav Osner comments, you're allowed to go on the road before you daven. You say Berurah Sha'amar, and then when you get there, you daven with a minyan. And now we continue with the Mishnah Berurah Sivkot Chavalev, with the, perhaps we'll call them controversial, not that they're controversial, on some unknown halachos. You're not allowed to eat right away. The Mishnah Berurah begins with Chizuk. I guess he understood that this is a difficult halacha. If someone is over on this, Amru Chazal Shalav HaKasav Aimer, Chazal say the pasuk refers to such a person, Vayisi Shlachti Achrei Gavecha, you throwing him after your gaiva. And explains the Mishnah Berurah, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, La'achar sha'achal v'shaseh, after you eat and drink, v'nisga'eh, and you become haughty, you tend to your own needs, then kibul ha'malchus shamayim, then you worry about Hashem. Similarly, the pasuk, you should not eat on your blood. You cannot eat before you daven for your own needs. And there it is. Sometimes people say, no, I'm allowed to have shahakal, adama, etc. Says the Mishnah Berurah, even te'ima, even tasting is forbidden. Says the Mishnah Berurah, says the Dirshu, note number 28. Let's say you have a heter like we saw because of refuah. So Risham Zalman is misupak. Is it better to have pachas make exayis, or at that point does it not make a difference? But again, that's only if one has a heter to eat like we saw for health reasons, which by the way is a classical story, which we're going to talk about in a moment. Someone has to take medication in the morning, and with his medication he can only take it if he eats food. That would be a classical scenario. Now, Sivkat al-Chavez is a very famous Mishnah Berurah in which he teaches us, even though the Machaber said, what are you allowed to drink before davening? Just mayim, just water is mutter. Says Mishnah Berurah, why? Once we understand the reason that you could have water, we'll see that maybe other things are included. There's no gaiva to have a cup of water before davening. It says Mishnah Berurah, without sugar, it's aser. Beer is vade aser. To have beer is aser. V'tei coffee. Oh, says Mishmur, wait. What about a cup of tea or coffee? Motor l'shtaisa kodem tefillah. Why are you allowed to drink them? I don't understand. So Mishnah Berurah explains, Kidei shuchlachavin daitu l'spalo. And this is the classical answer. I need to die, I need to eat, I need to have kavana. So at some level it's true. With regard to coffee and tea, the Mishnah Berurah gives in and says, for that, I agree with the Svara that'll help you davening. Ubifrat, continues the Mishnah Berurah, you're accustomed to them and you're not going to be able to daven without them. So coffee and tea, I'll give in. But the Mishnah Berurah says this is only without sugar and milk. But says Mishnah Berurah, sugar. We're makel, the item of the belt is makel with sugar. Why? Now why is it forbidden to have sugar? Because there's no greater gaiva to have sugar in your coffee before you go and you daven. That's if you just want to have a sweet geschmack drink. If you put a little sugar cube in your mouth, and this is the line. And without that little bit of sugar, then and this is really where it comes from. As we'll see, that if one could only drink, for him, what is a cup of coffee with sugar and milk, and without the sugar and milk he cannot drink the coffee. So that's like at the level of the Mishnah Berurah, putting the sugar cube in your mouth. That's allowed because it's not gaiva. Because why are you doing it? You're not doing it to have some fancy geshmaka caramel maca fro, whatever type of drink. You're just putting in the sugar and milk so that you could get it into your system, so that you could drink it to daven. That is allowed, says the Mishnah Berurah. What comes out of here? Or to have a little mezainis while you're drinking. Ein shom sadaka was I couldn't feel very strong words. What do you mean? I can't have a coffee without a little mezainis in my system. Says Mishnah Berurah, there's no tzad, you can't think about being mekel. Emloi, unless someone has a heart condition, and as we pointed out, if someone's on medication, and for refuah he can't have it on an empty stomach, then of course would yes be allowed. And we call Makayim Tov Shem Metzchila Kavanah Bar Shema Yisrael. Says Mishnah Berurah, and if you're going to, you are a chayla, you're going to eat, you should say Shema Yisrael first, because of a sefer Pesach Shuvah Chadash. Adds on another very important detail. Aside from the issue with drinking the sugar and the coffee and tea, says that the Pesach Shuvah Chadash, there's another issue. You have a group of people getting together and hacking and drinking and schmoozing, ayin sham taimai. Comes another Isser. Why? Why are you not allowed to do your own needs before you daven? So you're not thinking about anything else before you daven. And King goes to Shulchan Aruch of base. You're not allowed to do anything before you daven. And those that get together and they sit down and they hack and they schmooze with their coffee before they daven, they come even to another Aveira to be over on Kriyishma, the Zman of Kriyishma and Tefillah. So again, issue number one is, can you drink the sugar, the coffee and tea? And even like we explained that will perhaps be makel, because without it we can't drink it without the sugar and milk. Fine, but you still can't drink it b'asivis chaverim with a group of friends. You still cannot have a party before you daven. And Mishnah Berurah said, the Bechaber said, even b'Shabbos, if Gadol Chav Gimel explains the Mishnah Berurah, Kalaymar, what does that mean? Maybe you'll tell me either way on Shabbos, you can't drink before Kiddush. That's only once the Zman of Kiddush begins, which is after you daven. You didn't daven yet, so the Zman of Kiddush didn't come, but you still are not allowed to have any food or drink. Why? Because of the davening issue. If someone needs for a fool, if someone's drinking not for gaiva, just for medicinal purposes, the refuah, you let have different drinks for refuah. Before we call it a day, let's just scroll up over here for a moment that the Dirshu over here tells us in number 31. Let's just go there for one moment. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this is all for a healthy person. But a chayla, that for his refuah, he's allowed to eat before davening. The Berurah and Reish Beitesh teaches us a startling halacha. Mishnah Berurah is of the opinion you have to make kiddush on Shabbos first if you're going to eat, if you are a chayla. What about a woman? That's a different discussion. And we conclude with Dirshu number 32, in which it teaches us, what about ketanim that reach the age of chinuch? Still, note, they're allowed to eat, because there's no chinuch on starving a child. Obviously, that only helps until bar mitzvah. And finally, in number 33, the Aruch HaShulchan says, take vitamins, you're allowed to take before davening, as that is a form of refuah. And finally, what about the lilois davar matuk sheinu b'leah? Let's say to chew a piece of gum. Mishnah Berurah says that is allowed, so that you're not going to come to spit in the base measures. That's not gaiva. You're not swallowing anything. So you're just doing it. Perhaps another similar example will be, to do mouthwash, just to cleaning your mouth. That will be allowed, and we'll pick it up from Sif Dalet in the next year. B'siyata Dishmaya.